Well, hello and welcome to the Alliance Against Seclusion and Restraint live series. My name is Guy Stevens. I am the founder and executive director of the Alliance Against Seclusion and Restraint. Also, lucky you, the host of the podcast here. Excited to have you here with us today. It is our usual day. It is Thursday, January 16th, one of our first podcast of the new year, and we are excited to have you back with us. Those of you that are not familiar with who we are and what we do, the Alliance Against Seclusion and Restraint was formed about 6 years ago. Began with a personal experience, a personal journey. Started an organization really focused on looking at things like physical restraint and seclusion and suspension and expulsion and corporal punishment, all the things often being done to kids in the name of behavior, all the things that were having a lot of harm, and began to advocate for changes, advocating at schools, advocating at the state and local level, advocating at the federal level, trying to influence changes in laws and policies, doing what we can to try to make a positive difference. So we've been around now for about 6 years, and we've got a lot of work that we've been doing to try to influence some change. Excited to have today with me a special guest. I've got today joining me Erin Grimm, who I'm going to introduce here in just a couple of minutes. But before I do, I have a couple of housekeeping items, announcements, whatever you want to call it, that I want to share with you. The first of which, it is Thursday the 16th. And just a few days away, we have a very special event coming up. We've got a virtual conference coming up on Monday, the 20th, and tickets are still on sale. The event is called Supporting All Brains, How Neuroscience and Neurodiversity Affirming Approaches can better support students, teachers, and staff. It is an all-day virtual event being hosted by the Alliance. It is on Monday, and we've got a fantastic lineup of speakers, including Dr. Lori Desautel and many others. We've got some great sponsors here also. So encourage you, if you are interested, to check that out. If you go to the Alliance website, you can go to endseclusion.org. You go to the Alliance website, it is linked on our homepage right now. There's a lot of other great content for you to explore as well. I would encourage you to do that. You could, for instance, go to Take Action and learn how you can join the Alliance. You can learn about some of our services as well. For instance, we're doing some book studies, and we've got online learning and lots of great content. So anyway, would encourage you to go check that out and learn more about the conference. It's not too late to sign up. And really good news, even if you've already got plans on Monday, this event that we're doing, it will be a live event, but it will also be available after the fact in our online learning management system. And we're actually going to there's going to be more in the learning management system than you get on the online event. So you're going to get some bonus sessions, you're going to get some extra content, and all of that is just $29 for tickets. So if you're interested, check it out and join us on Monday for the event. And from that, just want to mention to you again, as always, when we do these, they are recorded. So you might watch this on Facebook, you might watch it on YouTube or LinkedIn. You can go back to any of those platforms after the fact and watch it over again. Or if you begin with us and you start to watch it and then suddenly realize that you're not going to be able to watch the whole thing, you can go back and finish it there. Also, it is available as an audio-only podcast. So if you prefer to listen on the go, you want to listen to it in the car or while you go for a walk, you can go to Spotify or Apple Podcast or wherever you get podcasts, and you can find our podcast there as well. I do want to mention new year, and we have continuing support from a sponsor that we had all of last year, helping to sponsor our podcast, and we are still actually looking for additional sponsors. So if you're interested in being a sponsor for our podcast, we've got some great plans where you can get an individual sponsor for an episode, but you can also become a sponsor and provide a monthly obligation. And once a month, you can get a ad on one of our podcasts, and that's really affordable as well. So if you're interested in that, reach out to us and let us know. But I do want to take a moment to thank Connie Persick and Supportable Solutions. They were a sponsor of our podcast all of last year, and they are again committed to sponsoring our podcast this year. Connie, of course, is a friend, a colleague, somebody I work with very closely, has developed something called the Why Toolkit. And the Why Toolkit is a different approach to getting to the deeper why of behavior. And it's a fantastic approach, really informed by a lot of the work that I think many of you know and love, whether it's Mona Delahooke or Lori Desautel or others. This is a fantastic approach. Let me share with you a brief little advertisement here about the Why Toolkit.
Behaviors are signals to the deeper whys. The Y Toolkit, a tool built for and approved by teachers, parents, and administrators that can both assess and support individuals struggling with behaviors. Connie has created a document that turns typical behavioral documents upside down and replaces them with a deep dive into what really matters: how to support each child within a compassionate and relational framework based on their individual differences. The Y Toolkit was found to decrease seclusion and restraint by 21% in a year-long pilot study.
And again, I encourage you to check it out. One of the great things about the Y Toolkit is it's something that can be used within your schools. And it is also something that, as a parent, that if you want to check it out, it's very affordable. You can get a single seat, and I think it's under $20, and you can check it out, learn about it, and then go into your school and recommend it as an approach to really kind of understanding the deeper why behavior. And it can be helpful in coming up with plans that are aligned with our principles, which are trauma informed, neuroscience aligned, neurodiversity affirming, relationship driven, and collaborative. So thank you, Connie, again, for being a sponsor for the podcast. We thanks for Portable Solutions for their support. So as I get ready here to introduce our guest, I just want to remind all of you that might be watching live. And I say this every time, but you have an option to go into the chat if you're watching on one of our platforms and let us know who you are and where you're from. I always enjoy seeing where people are joining us from. We tend to have people that join from all over the world, and it's always fun to see, oh, here's somebody from New Zealand or Australia or wherever it may be. So let us know in the chat who you are and where you're from, and I look forward to seeing who is here with us. So with that, let me go ahead and introduce our guest today. And really excited to introduce Erin. Erin comes from a long line of educators. Erin has over 10 years of experience teaching world languages and English, and now owns her own business, Seahurst Learns Together, which is dedicated to academic coaching of students and with what she calls alternative emotional intelligence. We are excited to have Erin here. Erin has also been an author for many things, including writing a story for our website. So at any rate, Erin, welcome, and thanks for joining us here today.
Thank you so much for having me.
Absolutely excited to have you. So I want to go back in time a little bit. We're just going to have a conversation today. We'll probably talk for about an hour or so and share with people a little bit about who you are and your experience and why some of these things that we care about a great deal are important to you. So we're just going to have a bit of a conversation. I'm going to let people know, if you happen to be watching live, again, tell us who you are and where you're from. But as you're watching, you are welcome to put a question or comment in the chat as well. And on that cue, I'll just say, and Marion, always great to see you joining us from Australia. It is probably it's tomorrow. It's Friday morning, probably 7, 8 o'clock in the morning over in Australia. So appreciate you getting up and maybe having some coffee with us. Also have Andy here. Andy is an amazing, individual who is also a volunteer here with the Alliance and a presenter for our event that's coming up on Monday. Andy has a fantastic presentation that I'm really excited about. And a friend, Nicole, here in Montclair, New Jersey. And Montclair, New Jersey has been in the news lately for their use of seclusion and restraint, an issue that's been going back some time there. And we've been actually working, hopefully, to make some change there. So with that, I want to talk about you, who you are, how we connected, and a little bit more. So I want to begin by just kind of taking our connection back. I think I initially connected with you because you had connected with a colleague, Andy Prisco, who runs a company called Jumpstart Mastery. And Jumpstart Mastery is actually, all ties together here, a sponsor for our upcoming event on Monday. But I've known Andy for quite some time, and I met Andy in part because of the work that he was doing with Greg Smith in Pennsylvania, and they were doing some amazing work around reducing and eliminating seclusion and restraint from forensic settings in the Pennsylvania State Hospital system. And many people look at environments like schools and think you need seclusion rooms. Well, they were able to work to get rid of those in environments like forensic settings that can be really, really challenging. Andy, I think, had connected with you. So why don't you tell us a little bit about how you met Andy and how you learned about us, and then we can talk a little bit more about kind of the connection we made.
Sure. So I've written 2 books, and with those 2 books, I got connected to the Seattle Times. And they had me write an article about my mental health treatment. I've been hospitalized twice, once with involuntary hospitalization. And I wrote in there about how I was grateful because I'd almost died. But then for you, actually wrote about how with time I've been thinking there could have been a better way rather than involuntary treatment. Anyway, so Andy reached out to me and I was on his podcast. And there's no one I would rather have talked to about, the details of my crisis de-escalation and mistreatment and all of that. Just the compassion he brought to severe mental illness was transformational for me, even during the interview. So I love Andy. He's great.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I agree. We've had the opportunity to kind of collaborate a bit with Andy, and he's doing some amazing work, and I think really working in some really complex situations. So I appreciate I'll occasionally get an introduction through Andy or vice versa. I'll make a connection with him because I'm a big believer that kind of collaboration and working together makes a big difference. So when you first connected with me, I remember one of the early conversations we had, and in fact, it would go back to your article that we'll talk about in a moment. But you actually were kind of taking a slightly different approach initially on the idea of restraint and seclusion, and kind of looked at the organization and thought, well, that's probably well intended, but and subsequently you wrote an article, and the article was titled "Like a Dog: From Child Abuse to Involuntary Hospitalization." And I wonder if you might just kind of talk about kind of that initial conversation. Then we'll get into your article a bit as well. Kind of what were your thoughts initially, having talked to Andy and then connecting with me?
In both cases, what I was struck by was the idea that there's another way. Because when I first was hospitalized, it was a sense of, thank God I didn't die. And so I was grateful that I had survived. But then when I was talking to Andy and then later with you, I was thinking, oh, what if I had been in crisis and actually treated like a human being and also not died? So right. In both cases, it was kind of an aha moment of, oh, we can think more creatively about what it would look like to flourish with neurodiversity.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and it's interesting the way you frame that, because not only what if, and I could be treated in a better way, but on the other side of that, there are individuals, and unfortunately far too many of them, who have died because of I'm going to put up air quotes here, treatment, but because of things that were done to them when they were dysregulated, or having a mental health crisis, or misunderstood. So any of the times that we can change our approaches to better support people, the outcomes sometimes can really be affected in a way that can actually save a life.
Yeah, and I want to just jump on that, because one of the things that I've always been struck by is in Eastern medicine, if the person is harmed by the treatment is considered a failure. So if you escape being mistreated and then you're traumatized afterward, that was an unsuccessful intervention.
Right.
And that's much more seen in a non-Western perspective.
Yeah. I was struck by a recent personal experience where I had my mother, actually, who was hospitalized over an extended period of time with some pretty complex medical issues. And one of the things that struck me is, in the whole time, and this was over about 3 months that she was in the hospital, initially for emergency surgery. And again, when you end up in the hospital for 3 months in the ICU and critical care unit, there's a lot of things that are happening. One of the things that struck me about that experience, and again, this is not, we're not talking a psychiatric type of setting here. We're just talking about a general medical setting, but is the lack of any thought about the mental health of patients based on the trauma of treatment and experience that they have. We were kind of advocating and saying, like, this is really, this is really difficult to be in this position for so long. And I think even, I mean, you would expect, I think sometimes there's expectations that aren't true in settings where you would think they would absolutely be true, like, in mental health types of settings that aren't happening. But even in kind of more generalized medical settings, there is a lot of medical trauma. And when you begin to look at neurodivergent individuals and medical trauma, it is really significant. And I guess, as we've been working on, a lot of the focus of the work of the Alliance has been thinking about education, and for good reason. I mean, that's kind of where my story started, but it's also a place where we see a lot of people misunderstood in the name of behavior, and a lot of things done to them and a lot of harm caused. But, as you really look at this, there are so many places where harm is done in the name of help.
Yes.
That is long lasting. And, there seems to be little recognition in some cases of the importance of it. So with all that, I didn't mean to get on a soapbox for a minute, but I just was kind of thinking about, as you were saying this. So you wrote an article for us at one point. I'm actually going to pull that up on the stage here. And the article was titled "Like a Dog, From Child Abuse to Involuntary Hospitalization." And of course, I want to share a couple of things. One, as a trigger warning to people, we're talking about things that are pretty traumatic, and so be aware of that. But two, for your own sake as well, we talked about talking about this article, but recognizing what you've been through and your willingness to share your experience, despite the fact that these are things that can be really difficult to share. So I just want to acknowledge that up front. But I wonder if you might talk a little bit about your experience and what you were writing about in the article that you wrote for us.
Yes. I think the connection between childhood experiences of mistreatment will shape a person's acceptance or rejection of how they are treated by systems. So basically, I see child abuse or even just restraining children as a form of compliance assurance into an adulthood of control. And the medical institution, there's books about how the domination of Western perspectives has actually made it so that medicines are way too expensive. Treatment is either non-existent or overly invasive. And all of this comes down to control. Even the decision to use a framework that would make a child feel like this hurts me more than it hurts you, or these kinds of comments. If a person is lacking empathy when they're treating a person, then that's the breakdown that leads to the dehumanization of people with neurodivergence. So that, to segue into the ending of it, the way we discipline children matters because we need to have empathy. And I feel that a lot of these institutions, including education, professionalize empathy in a way that makes students who are not compliant in the way that
Right. Yeah.
So,
and anybody that watches the podcast on a regular basis knows the C word in the world that is at the top of my list of words that I hate the most is compliance. We do a lot of harm to people in the name of compliance. And, very often, we find those situations where, compliance seems to be the goal, and compliance is the wrong goal. I mean, not to say that in situations, whether it's a child in a school or, an individual in a different setting, not to say that there's not, a need for working together and understanding boundaries and various things. But when compliance becomes the goal, you miss so much. And that compliance, you can, I've had people argue with me about this, and I'm pretty secure with where I land on it. But people are like, well, compliance works. Well, it depends on what you mean by works, right? I mean, you can make people comply with you by doing really bad things to them. Absolutely. You can do bad things to people to make them comply with you, but is that really working? Is that actually leading to a significant amount of trauma? Is that leading to a lot of harm in that individual? And what's interesting in your story is that, and I think that there's many people out there that could relate to this, but that childhood experience you had, that childhood trauma you experienced, primes you to be more more vulnerable, I think, to
Yes.
other mistreatment and abuse,
Hmm.
throughout your life and throughout your adulthood. When we begin to normalize these things, and we can even take it, and we're going to dive into school and education in a minute because you've got a lot of background there. But even when we look at things through a certain frame, the word discipline, for instance, I mean, that word, when you think about the word discipline, a lot of people think punitive consequences, teach you a lesson. You're gonna, you've got to learn that these things aren't acceptable. The word discipline comes from the roots of meaning that is really about to learn or to teach. And if you look at discipline through the lens of teaching, we've got to understand that very often when a individual, whether a child or not, is not meeting the expectation that somebody has over them, there's a lot of reasons why that might be happening. You might have a very dysregulated kid. You might have a kid that has experienced trauma. You might have a lot of different things. But when
Well,
that focus is on compliance, I mean, it really causes harm. Go ahead.
I also want to say it's not helping children who are not presenting with these more extreme issues, because you find nowadays the students who are in their 20s, they graduate college and then they don't like the career they trained for, or maybe they don't know their path. And it's because they're forced into this conformity mindset early on. They're like, oh, I do this, I do this, I do this, then I'm happy. And it's like, well, no, who are you as a person? Or, the DSM, it says, you have these things. I've been diagnosed with schizoaffective disorder. So, for me, I spend 3 hours a day praying, and then I write and get a lot done, and I tutor, I have a great experience. But if I don't spend that time just connected, that's not compliant. That would be psychotic, according to, but it works. I have a full productive life. I've been married for 17 years. So this compliance thing, it's hurting everyone in our society, with the most extreme version being mass incarceration.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, one of the things that we focus on heavily here is, the things, and of course, a lot of our work focuses on kids, but, we care about a lot of people in a lot of situations. But,
Yeah.
you look at the kids that are on the other side of these compliance demands that end up with lots of punitive exclusionary discipline. So it's restraint, seclusion, suspension, expulsion, corporal punishment. Yes, we still have 17 states where it's perfectly legal in a public school to hit a child and inflict pain upon them in the name of discipline. And when we do these things to children, we are increasing the potential that these are children that will end up moving down the school to prison pipeline. And I look at it. I mean, Erin, I look at the data out there. I look at the fact that we incarcerate more people here in the United States than anywhere else in the world, and that to me is an absolute travesty. I mean, this is so much of this is avoidable, but it's not avoidable when you continue to perpetuate mindsets and ideas that cause a lot of harm.
Yeah. And I also recommended a website called transformharm.org.
Mm.
It's written by African American abolitionist feminists who are working to, restore dignity and humanity to our institutions. And I just want to give a plug for their book too, We Grow the World Together, that is parenting toward abolition. I find that having a really radical perspective, even if you don't live by all the details, is extremely important lens, because you become a lot more accepting of behavior that is unexpected. So I love reading and practicing as much as I can those kinds of frameworks.
Yeah, I hear you. I'm gonna pause for a second, just share a couple things here. We have Stacy joining us from Mexico. Also have Chantel, who is our lead Canadian volunteer, joining us now. I don't even know how to pronounce that, Chantel, so I'm gonna have to work on that. I'm not going to try, or it'll be bad. But you're in a new place, and glad to have you still joining us. Had a couple comments here as we've gone along. When they focus on the compliance, they miss sealing actual child. Absolutely. Nicole jumped in and said, I'm glad to catch you in this podcast. It's all about compliance in schools. It's so harmful to all children, and it leads to harm in adults. Because when we compliance train kids, they become compliant adults. And you know what? When people ask me, like, well, why does somebody restrain and seclude a kid? Well, because we made a compliant adult and we've told them that they should be restraining and secluding a kid, and they say, okay, well, somebody in authority told me this is what I do. We should be questioning things that don't feel right to us or don't make sense. Yeah. But it is really easy when you live in a compliance-based world to kind of fall into that where, okay, well, somebody in authority, somebody wearing a white coat, somebody, whatever it may be, we kind of get that mindset. Chantel just shared, I'm sorry that you experience these awful things in your own life.
Thank you, Chantel.
Chantel's a fantastic human. Nicole again jumped in and said, you can get compliance with children better with relationships. Yeah. And again, it's not necessarily the compliance, but it's like, how do you work with, compliance. Okay. Compliance is how religion keeps. Okay. So somebody kind of commenting on the religious aspects of this. And of course, one of the things I've had the opportunity to do is talk to some people that have some background with religious trauma, because there are, places where that can be the focus as well. Wow, we've got a lot of people. We've got somebody joining us from New Zealand, Linda, who is a frequent flyer here at the Alliance. Great to see you here, Linda, as always. And hopefully I'll see you on Monday or for the the event we're doing. Andy said, yes, adults enforce compliance because they were trained to comply themselves. Andy wrote a fantastic article for us once talking about their own experience with compliance and how, it would lead to situations where you begin to question your own thoughts and your own feelings and things like that as well. I'm going to share something here real quickly in this vein, because back to my most hated word with a C, compliance. There was a fantastic illustration done by a speech language pathologist, Emily Hammond in Australia. Goes by the name NeuroWild. And if you look at the graphic here, we've got a swimming pool. We've got hands that are going down as if a child is drowning in the swimming pool. And there we have the adult. A student would not comply with instructions to swim. I mean, that's a very strong, powerful, but simple message. But very often that's how we look at things. We're so focused on that compliance bit that we kind of miss what's going on.
Yeah. And also, I think it's the reason we have a teacher shortage, because a lot of the teachers as human beings are feeling dehumanized by these forced compliance of even the standards, which are creating the school to prison pipeline. I know when I was a language learning specialist, they actually said, we have to have the students reading well by third grade, which of course, but then they said, because they actually build the prisons based on third grade literacy results. And so that's how we were, fighting the clock. And meanwhile, the kids are being forced to comply to these lessons based on standards for a test that isn't engaging them emotionally, that isn't engaging them in a way that would help them to shine and become who they're supposed to be.
Yeah, and I think very often our definition of who people are supposed to be is far too narrow, right?
No, I meant like,
yeah.
When I say supposed to be, I mean like every individual is a unique person.
Right. Yeah, no, I'm with you. I'm with you for sure.
Yeah.
No, I just kind of reflecting on, the way that our systems are often in place. I mean, to me, I remember having this conversation with my son at one point, and kind of this idea that the world needs the outliers. The world needs people that question things, that push on things. I've met more neurodivergent individuals in kind of the advocacy space who are out there, doing amazing things to question and change things. And often these are, these are kids that might, or people that might have been kids that weren't necessarily the compliant kids, and the world needs that. The world needs that kind of that kind of thought process. So I want to transition. So, again, in the article you shared about your own personal experience, kind of even experiences with child abuse, and how that led to kind of led to trauma, and kind of how that had an impact on you, later in life. And you had some, I think, important lessons that you took from it. And one of the quotes that I remember in the article was, the lesson that I take from this is that the attitude with which we discipline children really matters, as does the way we regard them in the first place. And that's a really powerful statement, the way we regard them in the first place. I actually happen to think that there's some fairly universal problems with how people think about children. And I'm kind of curious if you would drill into that a little bit, your quote there.
Yes. So it goes in line with what I was saying supposed to be. I think education is supposed to be helping uncover what the soul, or if you don't believe in that, the spirit or the human being is supposed to be. So for example, in ancient Greece, there was a concept from Aristotle called entelechy, Entelechy. And it was the example of the acorn turning into the oak tree. In the acorn, there's the oak tree. No two oak trees are the same. And it's pre-recorded. The acorn cannot become a pine tree, or something like that. And so each person has these unique codes of their soul or being. And if we are expecting them to comply, then you get people in their 40s having a midlife crisis, figuring out who they're supposed to be, when really, maybe they were supposed to be an artist and not an engineer, or maybe they were supposed to be a dancer and not obsessed with repeating math problems over and over again. And then also, for me, I really was creative. I loved music. I loved writing and reading. And I liked, as a teacher, to see what makes a student shine, because that's what they're supposed to do more of. And that takes empathy. That takes thinking of the child from their perspective. And a lot of this over standardization, over implementation of structures that are not authentic to a child's sense of self and who they are becoming, causes so much trauma, especially with the more sensitive souls in the classroom. And I want to be clear, I use the word soul, but by no means am I making a religious statement. Everybody has a being, whatever you want to call it.
Sure. No, I appreciate that. Yeah, I got a couple of just comments here real quick. And Stacey said, I'm from Louisiana and the prisons are built in the third grade reading scores. Nicole jumped in and said, our education system in America is not aligned with what we know to be true about early childhood development. And that's an important point as well. One of the things that has been, I think, transformative to me in learning some of the things that I've had the ability to learn over the last few years is, really kind of understanding child development through a lens of what we know today. And what I mean by that is, the 1990s, now, a few decades ago, the decade of the brain. We learned more about, the brain, the nervous system, than we knew in all of time before that. Yet, as much as we know about human behavior now and about brain development, much of what we're doing in schools and other settings is not really informed by that. And this is where we see so many problems, because people put expectations on children that aren't even developmentally appropriate. And when you begin to introduce children that might have a trauma history, or you begin to introduce neurodivergence, you're introducing things that again, people are not understanding. For me, it's even just understanding brain development, understanding that a 5-year-old doesn't have a fully functional prefrontal cortex, right? The logical, rational, thoughtful part of our brain, they don't have that same decision-making capability as an adult. But we often put people, especially kids, through that lens of, well, they should have known better. So anyway, I mean, I think there's a lot that goes down to even, the fact that a lot of our approaches are very heavily focused on behaviorism, reward and consequence models, and they're just simply not working.
Well, they don't work, and also they reward the wrong thing. You don't want to
Right.
reward compliance. You don't want to say you did this, get a star. You want to say, you were creative or you applied yourself to this. You want to reward the mindset that the child is bringing to a task. You don't want to just force compliance.
Right, right.
In my
And to some degree, I mean, even even kind of beyond the rewards, it's like what the real thing here is. It's the connection, right? When you connect, when
Exactly.
you connect with a kid, when a kid feels seen and heard and valued,
Hmm.
that's where it's at. I mean, we all do best for people that we know, people that we like, people that see us, people that value us, right?
Yeah.
And I think that's so important. So let's transition a little bit into, you come from a long line of educators. You're an educator yourself. Why don't you
Hmm.
tell us a little bit more about your education background? But what I'm really interested in is, how you've, because this is a journey, right? And this is a journey that no matter who you are, if you're on that journey, it's a really good thing to be on, because not everybody's on a journey. Some people just kind of stop where they are and think they know everything and don't want to move on. But when you're on this journey, you're continuing to learn, you're continuing to be curious, you're continuing to ask questions, but you're able to take those experiences you had, those very human experiences that you had, and you're able to reflect on them and see a lot of things differently, including not only the children that you might be supporting, but probably yourself. So I'd love to know more about your journey as an educator, and how some of your experiences, as a human, have influenced that.
First of all, thank you for saying as a human. That's true. A lot of places that I've spoken don't always acknowledge the human aspect that professionalization removes us from ourselves. So I would say my journey in education began when I was tutoring and helping my mom in the classroom when I was a high school student. In college, I worked with some speech language pathologists because I had linguistics background, helping students pronounce sounds like R and things like that. Um, I taught at UC Davis and City University, Seattle, for a little while, and I taught high school for almost 10 years. Um, and what I noticed about schools is kind of why I stepped away. Because, first of all, with my mental health condition, it was increasingly challenging. But I would say that it was because of how challenging um, the inhumanity of school settings is. Just like a child would be perhaps in some situations triggered by the inhumane situation of even a classroom being forced to sit still when that's not in their mood right then. As a teacher who is compassionate and able to connect with children who were struggling, this like rushing to finish the lesson, it just didn't work for me. I could talk students out of a panic attack, connect with them on a deep level, and they would stop their panic attack. And yet, if a child's distressed by doing a presentation, and the idea that I would force them to stand in front of a classroom and speak when it's clearly extremely traumatic, um, it's one of the reasons I started my tutoring business. So yeah, I might have gotten distracted there. What was your question?
Well, yeah, I just wanted to understand kind of how your, your experiences, your journey, how that kind of factored into your thoughts and approach as an educator, and so
Yeah,
just getting a sense of that.
yeah. I guess I'll start with an example from the movie Wicked. If you've seen that, it just came out, and I haven't finished watching it. But there's a scene, Alfalfa, the Wicked Witch. It's a humanizing portrait of her that basically challenges the idea of inherent evil. But the she shows up at school. She's rejected. she's shamed, and a teacher comes in, sees her, gives her hope, and then she sings this beautiful song of like what her life will be. And that's what I had from a couple of teachers when I was a student. That's what I was able to be to a couple of students. And that's why I still work in education, is the ability to uncover what's already there and breathe life into the child already being who they are, and seeing them as them and not as I'm telling them to be, which I don't tell them to be. It's like sifting into the future instead of hammering into a hole.
Right.
So.
Right. Yeah, no, I love that. I'm going to share just a quick comment here, and I'd love to have your reflection on it as well. Paige says it's frustrating how many educators and parents blame special needs parents for not controlling their children's behaviors when those behaviors are a direct result of the child's disability. It's also unfair for them to claim that these students are the reason they left teaching, as that is misleading. I couldn't agree more that teachers are leaving due to overwhelming mandates and disproportionate salaries. Yeah, and certainly there's a lot of challenges that face education and educators as well. It's a tough time. Yeah, but and of course it's not just blaming kids. I mean, even as an adult, we're blamed for behavior.
Mm-hmm.
We're blamed for behavior that we don't always control. Because just like a child, we can become dysregulated, and when we become dysregulated, our prefrontal cortex goes offline. Our thinking, logical, rational part of our brain goes offline. It happens to all of us. I've told stories before, but I mean, I can think of many times that I'm not proud of how I responded or reacted because I was dysregulated, and that happens to all of us. And we all get blamed sometimes for our behavior. But what are your thoughts on that? About how very often parents get blamed and individuals get blamed? Any thoughts?
Yeah, I think, and this again is why I was so frustrated as a teacher. The egocentricity, I'm not going to say of teachers, but the teacher training programs too, where it becomes about the teacher working through their lesson, not engaging and meeting the child in a developmentally appropriate way. That framework is what enables a teacher to say, if it weren't for this child, I would still be teaching, or this child derailed my career. Like, that's horrible. And it's the mindset we're trained into when we learn how to write a lesson plan, let alone that kids are not thinking in the way that the teacher is trained to think they're thinking. We don't know. And every child has a different way of looking at the world. And so this idea that all the children are the same except for those outlier children is so toxic, and it's so pervasive.
Right. Yeah. Acorns Blues. Andy said adults have amygdalas too. Absolutely. And one of the important things about this is that so much of the important work here begins with the adult's brain and nervous system. An adult who is overworked, not appreciated, dysregulated, is not in a good position to help kids who are having a hard time. And very often, we find that kind of happening where people are under all this pressure. It can be external as well. It can be their own past trauma. And that leads to really difficult times supporting not only yourself, but then, being in a position where that expectation is on you to support others. So yeah, good point. I mean, we all have amygdalas. We all get dysregulated. We all have moments that we, may feel like, gosh, I wasn't at my best then. And we've got to give ourselves grace. And just like kids, as adults, we have a fluctuating capacity. Our capacity is not the same in every moment, every day. There's all these demands that are on us. There are all these, factors. There's our own, kind of internal feelings and sensations. There's so much that goes on that I think is so important for people to be aware of. So I know that you've made really clear already. One of the things that I think is so important here to any of this work, and I say any of this work, from education to healthcare to wherever we may be talking, and that is the relationship piece.
Hmm.
I often joke that, when it comes to, what my thought is on the 3 R's of education, the 3 R's of education really should be relationship, 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 because
Yes.
without that connection, it's really hard to feel safe and regulated. And if you don't feel safe and regulated, your learning logical, thoughtful brain is not going to be online for learning. So it really
Yes.
has to start with that relationship as a foundation. And I know you actually have been going through some interesting training as well. You mentioned to me previously that you've been doing some work with the Karen Purvis Institute, I believe it is, but the trust-based relational kind of approaches. And of course, while I realize you're not here to speak for the program itself, I'd love to know a little bit more on a high level, kind of like, what is the program and why were you interested in it, and what kind of things you might be learning from that as well.
Yeah. So one of my foci is definitely working on, reducing policing, reducing, the presence of police officers in schools, reducing, all these excessive force things. And I wanted to know, what can I replace this with? Because you can't just, say do nothing, when a child is experiencing a
Right.
challenge or something like that. And so I was really intrigued by this trust based relational intervention, which is about relationships with children. And again, I really don't feel like I should represent the institute, but
Sure.
it's at Texas Christian University,
Okay.
um, and um, they're in the process of updating their frameworks, because I did, when I met with them, talk to them about children with autism, because I work sometimes with children with autism. They're actually updating their frameworks, so that they're more responsive to that as well. But basically, it's a framework that is preventative. By nurturing the relationship, by connecting, you're already putting money in the piggy bank, so that when there is a meltdown, you can reestablish trust, um,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
see it as a behavior, as a challenge rather than a character flaw. um,
Mm-hmm.
so it's just like, oh, that's information for me about what I could do differently to help my child connect with me, or something like that, instead of thinking, you know, you're a problem, I don't want to look at you, or shaming the child or the parent whose child has become dysregulated. This shunning and shaming, we have to get over this. It's so toxic.
Oh, absolutely, and harmful, and
Yes.
traumatic, and yeah,
Oh
absolutely,
yes. I mean,
absolutely.
there's nothing worse than social shunning.
Right.
I think it prevents all sorts of healing in the world.
There was
Um,
an interesting podcast I listened to a few months ago, and I want to say it was on Hidden Brain, if I'm not mistaken. But they were talking about how some work that had been done around social isolation, and how social isolation was a factor in radicalization of people. That people that were socially isolated were more apt to kind of adopt very radical ideas, and very interesting. I mean, and I mean, I think that um, that connection piece, even in some of the studies about long term health, and one of the factors that comes up again and again and again when it comes to things like longevity and health, social connection. I mean, there's a lot of research out there that talks about aging populations, and that incredibly important piece of that social connection in terms of cognitive abilities and health and all of that. Such an important
yeah.
piece. Chantel mentioned a comment here, and it kind of ties back a little bit to what you're saying. But Chantel's gone through some really big challenges in terms of proper support for her daughter, and she said that she finally had a school team admit today that if there were bumps on Lily's return to school, that this time the adults need to make adjustments. And what's interesting about this, and what Chantel's sharing, is that very often in these approaches that are wrong, and I'm just going to say it, the approaches that are wrong, the things that aren't working, it puts all the emphasis on the child or the individual that's that's at the focus of this, right? It's all about changing the child's behavior, the individual's behavior. People are not going to be successful unless they look at what they can do to also better support that person by, in some cases, changing their own behavior or their own response. I mean, that's so critical, but so often we put all the onus on, in many cases, the kid who has the least life experiences, the least ability, the least, and I just think that that's wrong. I think, Chantel, that was a good point to bring into all of this.
I agree.
Yeah. So, again, and I appreciate you sharing a little bit about the trust-based relational kind of work that you've been digging into. So, aside from that, I mean, what other things are you focused on now? Where's your work now? Where's your work going?
Yeah.
What are the things that you're really focused on at this point?
A big thing I'm working on is something called Christians for a Free Palestine. And again, it has to do with the frameworks, right? They're, LGBTQ affirming, they're BIPOC queer led, they're about supporting the flourishing of the world and ending the occupation and the harm. And again, it comes down to compliance, right? Like, what is a checkpoint? A checkpoint is making sure there's compliance, or like the ending the genocide. It would be like, is there compliance? Right. If you're not doing exactly what we want, we can actually just bomb and raze an entire city, the Gaza Strip. And so again, it's like, if you're not having the right, it's thought policing in the extreme form, 1,000 horrific deaths and then 46,000 Palestinian deaths. And it comes down to colonial culture. And, I really do think the roots of the education malformation that we're experiencing has to do with white supremacy, colonialism, and all these things. And I do think that everyone can thrive with these decolonial frameworks, because it breaks, one of the things that has struck me is they say, the straight white male type as well is suffering because they're not connected to their emotions without therapy. This kind of, be strong, don't show emotions, don't be vulnerable. It's hurting everyone, including the people who are supposedly thriving as a result. So seeing all these struggles as connected is really important.
Right. I mean, there's no doubt that we live in a, I think a really tough time right now. I mean, I'm somewhat disheartened by the amount of division between people all over the world, and you can even look at it here in the U.S. in our recent elections, and the amount of division that kind of exists between people, and that can be a little bit overwhelming at times. And again, another stressor that we all have on our plates as we try to make it through. But
well, I have a framework that could be useful for you in this time. My values that I've taken from Gandhi, according to one book, are truth and nonviolence. And the author said, and I don't remember his name, but it's on my website on the main page, but that we can serve truth and nonviolence, or we can commit violence and untruths in the name of institutions, in the name of governments, in the name of all these things. But if our universal values were all truth and justice and nonviolence, then we wouldn't be dealing with these divisions. I agree. Yeah. It's a very divisive time.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So given all that, and again, I'm going to steer back for a moment to kind of your educational perspective, kind of given the challenges of the time. I mean, one of the things that we saw, and you may have seen as well, but even just going back to the global pandemic that we all had, and as kids went back to school, I think that many people recognize that, wow, there was this kind of global pandemic. There was this kind of trauma that many individuals experienced during that pandemic, whether it was a personal experience or just even, I found that a lot of kids, in different areas of their development, but I found that people that were kind of in that early teen age range when the pandemic hit, like the world suddenly became an unsafe place.
Yeah.
And as a result, I think that a lot of people during that time experienced some unusual trauma. And as kids got back, we saw an increase, I think, in stress and behavior and people having a hard time. And one of the things that I worry about a lot is that that instead of moving forward, sometimes we move backwards. And as people begin to get concerned about, they focus on the behavior. They don't look up, upstream and figure out like what's the cause and why is somebody having a difficult time. That potential of having things go backwards always exists. So I'm curious. I'm curious from your perspective. Given kind of where we are right now in this moment in time, what are some things that you think can be helpful? And let's just focus. Let's just get really down on a very specific level. The world at times, when you think about the entire world, seems overwhelming. But for a teacher that's out there, a young teacher that just started, in the past year or two, who feels overwhelmed, who is questioning their choices, what kind of advice might you give somebody, kind of in these times that I think have some challenges ahead, for successfully moving in a direction where you're focused on some of these things like relationships and other things like that? So what would your advice be for people that are out there right now, maybe early educators that are starting their career?
The work I recommend the most, there are some great people doing this work. And Parker Palmer is somebody to look up. He is an educator invested in democracy. He's in his 80s now, but he's a thought leader on the wholeness of teachers and the need for integrity in schools. So he is a spiritual teacher. He respects all religions. He's whatever. He's not specifically Christian in his writings, and he does get to the spiritual aspect of teaching because, in my opinion, it is a spiritual work, even in a public, non-talking about religion setting. You're watching a person grow, a human being. So that's, for me, that's spiritual.
Right. Yeah. It's funny. I mean, I'm not as spiritual, perhaps, but I do look at it very much like part of our. When I hear people say things like, "Well, the teachers just need to focus on the subject matters, and this shouldn't be in our school and that shouldn't be in our school. They should just be focused on these things." When you're talking about bringing a child into school when they're 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, keep going, years old, you are talking about helping to raise a human being, right? So part of the educational experience as an educator, it's not just that you've learned this subject and you're going to share the subject. You are helping to shape a human being, and that can be in a very positive way, but it can also be in a negative way if we push aside all of that. I mean, this really is about how do we develop strong communities and support systems to raise human beings. This is not just all about how we shove knowledge in a kid's head. This is about helping to make the humans of tomorrow that hopefully will help make the world a better place.
And there's another great, I haven't been in the classroom since 2019, except to substitute during the pandemic. But there's another thing that I listened to when I was younger called The Cult of Pedagogy. It's a podcast. And this lady, she was a teacher and she became just a teacher resourcer. So she just makes amazing materials. I recommend that. And I actually have gotten a lot out of looking at your website, Alliance Against Seclusion and Restraint. You have some amazing partners that I'm learning from. So I really appreciate your website. It's very comprehensive.
Yeah, I appreciate that. One of the things that we try to do, with the website is we share a lot of articles written by teachers, written by experts, written by, families, and part of the work that we do is really, we want to, you mentioned earlier, it's not just a matter of saying don't do these things, are wrong. It's like, how do we point people to better directions and share with them better things? It does no one good just to criticize them and say, well, you're wrong, or the way you're thinking about this isn't the same as the way I'm thinking about it. So, um, I mean, but the real need is, how do we bring people along? And if you happen to be further along, then help bring me along. If I'm further along, I want to help bring you along. This really needs to be, and I always hate when we see like these things emerge, like kind of us versus them mentalities. Like, let's do well for humankind and each other. And I think there's a lot of progress that can be made.
I can't stress enough how great the Karen Purvis Institute is for the trust-based relational intervention, in terms of like if a parent is getting frustrated, wants to do the very best for their child, but just doesn't have the skill set yet. They do trainings. They work with the foster care system as well to help parents, because in the foster care system, there's no ability to, thank God, like physically punish a child, right? Mm-hmm. Which is great, obviously. But given that, and given that there still are behaviors that can be something that needs to be addressed, this is a really good framework that even in the foster care system, they're using to train parents.
Yeah. And foster care, we see a lot of, I mean, there's a lot of trauma, that follows, kids that have been in the foster care system. And, we talk a lot about some of the early childhood trauma that comes with adoption and other things that, people just don't realize exist, and the impact of all of that. So that training, so they offer training for parents and caregivers. They offer training for educators. We'll see if we can share a link to that as well. That's fantastic. That's fantastic. So as we're getting ready to wrap up here today, I just wanted to kind of give you an opportunity if there were other things that you wanted to share. An hour goes by pretty quickly.
Yeah.
But if there are other things that you wanted to share before we kind of wrap up here today.
Yeah, I just want to say, it's a hectic time in our country, very stressful. We don't know what's going to happen. Some people have a lot of hope, others have a lot of agony. Some it's a combination, and I just hope that, you stay connected to people. In duress, we isolate, we self-isolate, we experience shame. There was the insulting of the Haitian immigrants, and then they're isolated. We need to reach across divides. We need to support immigration and love everyone who is in this country, regardless of if they're documented or not. So that's
I've always felt like we share far more in common than we have apart. But sometimes there are things that push people apart, and that's heartbreaking, because again, I think that even if you have different ideologies or different beliefs, at our core, we have the ability to connect. We have the ability to support each other and to heal. But unfortunately, there are sometimes interests that are not feeding that, and that's really upsetting for sure. Well, listen,
this website is one of my go-to places for healing. So thank you for your organization.
Well, I appreciate that, and again, you are always welcome to share another article if you want to. As you're going through the things that you are going through to learn more. One of the things we like to do is kind of share people's journeys. So, maybe one day if you want to write something about kind of some of the approaches that you've looked into or some of the things you've done, that's always really helpful. We want, again, it's that idea of like, how do we bring people along? How do we share with people our journeys and bring along and hopefully lead into better places. Just want to thank everybody who was here joining us today. And Linda just left us a comment here. Thanks, Erin. Peace and freedom for Palestine. Thanks, Guy. See you next week. And always appreciate having you here, Linda, and look forward to having you join us next week for the conference. And want to thank everybody else here that joined us today. We will be back again, I think, in 2 weeks. I don't remember what our schedule is, because right now my brain is full and overflowing, getting ready for we've got a conference called Supporting All Brains coming up on Monday. And that event is a all-day virtual conference. And as here I am on Thursday before the event, there's just like all these things that need to be done. So my day has been my day has been a little bit busy, but I want to thank you very much, Erin, for joining us. I'm going to ask you to stick around, but we're going to say goodbye to everybody else, and we will see you all again here in about 2 weeks, if not sooner. Take care.